About a year ago, I released a video called The Problem with Budget Cards. To this day, that particular video is my longest video and also my second best performing video in terms of views. It's also wildly unpopular compared to literally everything else I've released. The like to dislike proportion is an abysmal 77%. For context, my second lowest is around 95%, and a brief look at the comments section indicates that a lot of people take issue with various things contained within the video. I've asked myself a number of times if I should do something with that video. Is the video truly enough of a departure from the quality of the rest of my work to warrant some sort of action? A note in the description, or a pinned comment saying that I, enlightened future Alex, disavow the contents of the video? And up until now, I would always come to the conclusion that the answer is no. My running narrative to myself has been that it's a largely fine video, and that the reason people reacted the way they did comes down to some poor wording here and there, along with my choice to front-load the most controversial argument in the video. I figured this was likely amplified by an especially saucy thumbnail, along with the slow pacing and droning sluggish delivery that characterized my first three videos. However, I haven't really put much thought into the arguments themselves, and now that a year has passed, I want to do just that. I am here revisiting that video along with its central question, are cheap, powerful cards a problem? Was I onto something? Or flat out wrong? Or somewhere in between? In order to answer that, I'm going to first summarize what that video is saying, and you can skip 3 minutes ahead if you're already familiar with the contents of that video. Sol Ring is a powerful mana artifact printed very early in Magic's history. It was banned in Legacy and restricted in Vintage, leading to it commanding a moderate but affordable price for players in the lightly played casual format of Commander, which was slowly gaining steam during the 2000s. Due to some players considering it a staple, it was printed in all 5 decks in the first Commander set in 2011. However, it being a staple is a flawed argument for reprinting it because the card was only a staple due to its affordable price, itself a result of it not being legal in a large format. Printing a set for Commander would naturally grow the format, grow the demand for Sol Ring, and without a reprint, the card's price would be pushed in line with that of similar fast mana artifacts such as Mana Crypt, rendering it likewise a tool for the power gamers. I believe the format would be better if things had played out this way. Some have argued that it should be banned, but that ship has sailed given the number of reprints it has seen. However, Sol Ring still poses an interesting question. What is the effect of cards with wildly mismatched price and power level? For one, they warp how players look at other cards, and this affects how many cards of a given type players will run. Some players might decide how many cards of a given type to run ahead of time, but most won't. Instead, players will add the best options within their budget, and then a lot of them will notice the rapidly worsening power to money ratio and stop adding them at a certain point, even if running more of that type of card would be better for their deck. With vegetables like Interaction and Ramp, it's easy to distinguish the better options versus worse options, but when you get to fuzzier, more synergistic cards, it's more difficult to distinguish card quality because analyzing them often requires thinking about a variety of other cards and different situations. This leads to players adding a handful of the most powerful vegetable staples and then overloading on synergistic cards, leading to decks that are crammed with win more cards but lack a lot of the basic building blocks that lead to a deck consistently performing well. In addition to cards that pack a high power level compared to their price, a related type of card that can cause problems is expensive staples that are already in one's collection and which are thus free to add. As an example, in my mid-power Mary of Voltron deck, I initially added Sword of Forge and Frontier, but ended up cutting it as it felt out of place. It pumped up the deck's power level, but without solving any of the deck's existing weaknesses, making the deck less well-rounded overall. As another example, there are a lot of very powerful graveyard synergies out there, but the game is also filled with extremely powerful Silver Bullet graveyard hate. This means that upgrading a mid-power graveyard deck can backfire, putting it in competition with decks that will likely be running cards with the capability to totally dismantle an unprepared graveyard deck, and leading to a less consistent play experience. As another example, choosing to run infinite combos or other powerful strategies will draw attacks and interaction from opponents who are in the know, and this can be a problem if a player isn't prepared to deal with this hate. If your deck has a wide range of power levels in its potential plays, opponents will often be wary and default to attacking you, even if the average power level of your deck is lower than that of some opposing decks. Conclusion: Sol Ring is upsettingly powerful but isn't getting banned. You should figure out the correct number of things you need in a particular category ahead of time and avoid loading up too hard on synergistic win more stuff. Sometimes the theoretically most powerful option out there won't be the most powerful option for your deck, and sometimes the most powerful option for your deck won't be the best idea for the types of games you want to play. I don't run Torment of Hailfire in my turbo ramping Glissa deck because I don't want my opponents to equate me having a lot of lands with an immediate game loss. Cue time machine gag, the video's over. Okay, so that is the problem with budget cards condensed down into a pithy 3-minute summary. With a year of additional experience in writing, video making, and playing Commander, what do I think about this video's arguments? Well, past the 4-minute introduction, they're mostly fine, if a little unfocused. The second section of the video, where I talk about the effect of other cards being framed negatively by cheap, powerful cards, I maybe overstate the social dynamics at play a little bit, as I had the tendency to do in some of my earlier videos. However, a lot of my theorizing here does line up with observations I've had playing Commander and looking at deck lists. People do tend to overrate synergistic escalation type cards and underrate some of the more generic vegetables of the world. Players are clearly better at distinguishing power levels of simpler cards as compared to more complex ones, and this affects what their decks look like. Now, this point shouldn't take 7 minutes to make, and I don't think this section is written as well as it could be, but the point itself is basically fine. The third section of the video is what I would consider to be the core of this video, and it's basically a collection of somewhat related arguments branching off of the concept of a deck having diverse power levels. All of these arguments are individually pretty good, IMHO, and you'll recognize elements of them repackaged into later videos I've made. Choosing not to put powerful staples into mid-power decks is something that I basically made an entire video about, and I've likewise talked about the problem with adding random infinite combos to a deck. Deck consistency is also a subject I've talked about numerous times in the past year, and it's a core pillar of this section of the video. Even when I briefly jump back into talking about Sol Ring near the conclusion of the video, it's at this point decently framed, and I think the argument I make in this section about the card is a solid one. Having variable power levels of cards in your deck can lead to some unintended problems, and while this isn't a blistering indictment of Sol Ring in particular, it at least makes sense how Sol Ring might fit into this sort of argumentative framework. The conclusion to the video basically just restates a lot of the points in the previous two sections, and seeing as how I'm okay with most of these points individually, it's likewise fine. I don't think the video does a great job of connecting all the various points within it, but all of them at least follow to some degree from the core premise of the video, even if that premise is made a little murky at times. With the later parts out of the way, let's get to the introduction. The 4-minute intro is easily the most controversial part of the video, and probably the part that ended up causing the lion's share of the negative reaction the video received. So, how do I feel about those arguments now? Well, the rhetoric is pretty bad. I didn't argue the points well. Above all else, this is a structure issue. I simply don't really articulate what my problem with Sol Ring is in this section. Why is it a problem for an extremely powerful card to exist among much weaker cards in a large portion of EDH decks? I cover that territory in a roundabout way later in the video, but that's not good enough for a 22-minute YouTube video. Like, sure, if somebody watches the entire video and evaluates it cohesively, they might have a decent chance of catching on to what I'm going for. But look at this goddamn graph. Less than half of people are still watching when I get to the part of the video where I start to justify my Sol Ring slander. Now, it's not objectively bad argumentation to lead with a controversial claim to draw people in and give them a point of focus. That can be kind of cool, actually. But this video isn't set up for that kind of rhetorical style. It makes a bold argument that Sol Ring shouldn't have been reprinted, with little support or fanfare, and not much of a framing device with which to guide the audience to the justifying points. This is exacerbated by the slow pacing and bloated runtime of the second section of the video, as it likely burns off any sort of tension or momentum that a controversial argument might garner. This structuring obviously isn't good for the reality of people watching YouTube videos, and it's weak even for the people who fully watched the video and charitably interpreted its contents, as many commenters did. The points about Sol Ring simply aren't structured in a good way to persuade people who don't already agree with my conclusions on some level, and the fact that Sol Ring was then the framing device for the rest of the video predictably caused additional problems in maintaining a cohesive focus. So that's it, right? Future Enlightened Snail has decreed that the intro to The Problem with Budget Cards is bad? Well, no. I mean, it's not good. Let's be plenty clear about that. But my views haven't really changed on the points I was trying to make. I don't think Sol Ring should have been reprinted in Commander sets, because I don't think fast mana belongs in casual Commander. I don't have some sort of crazy essay worth of stuff to say in defense of that opinion. I just don't like what explosive starts do to the tempo of games. This is the argument I should have led with in that video if I even wanted to talk about Sol Ring, because it's extremely simple and impossible to misinterpret for somebody who isn't fully dedicated to the task of misinterpreting it. If you disagree that fast mana doesn't belong in casual Commander, that's fine. There are valid reasons to disagree with my thinking here, and I'm not here to change your mind on that today. I do, however, want to elaborate a little on why I think not printing Soul Ring in Commander sets would aid in the goal of keeping fast mana out of casual Commander. Because while I think a lot of people can follow the chain of logic I'm gesturing at, it's not entirely trivial. To start with, Soul Ring is fast mana, a term which generally refers to cards that are mana positive. Rituals can be a bit of a gray zone. I generally include them if they cost no mana, but any repeatably tapping mana rock that is mana positive the turn it's played is indisputably fast mana. These cards are the most distinguishing factor of CEDH, the thing that makes turn 1 or 2 wins even possible, and Soul Ring fits into this category of card to a T. With the card's fast mana status in mind, printing Soul Ring in a precon aimed at getting people into the format has symbolic power, situating the card as a casual staple that people should be playing. The fact that it was printed in all 5 of the first round of precons is all but saying, dear casual Commander players, this card goes in your deck. And it being a staple isn't tied to any sort of competitive keeping up aspect of things. Mostly. More on that later. I gestured at this argument when I pointed out that the first round of precons were quite poorly constructed, but I'll make it explicit here. The decision to print Soul Ring in every single precon since 2011 has likely had several different reasons behind that, and even if there was a primary one, it wouldn't be this sort of keeping up idea. Commander isn't a competitive format. There's nothing that inherently requires keeping up with. Rather, the scarce evidence that does exist suggests that Soul Ring was reprinted to amplify its position as a symbol of the format, to turn it into a mascot of sorts that would be run far and wide and be a point of connectivity between basically all players. Even though I dislike the card, I can't deny there's a certain power in that, a power that was recognized by Wizards of the Coast in 2010. I also alluded to the monetary motivation in the problem with budget cards, and this is almost certainly another one of the factors involved in printing Soul Ring. Putting a piece of fast mana in every precon absolutely helped Wizards of the Coast sell more units. They were a business putting out a new product line, and they wanted to make sure it was successful. I was a bit smarmy about this a year ago because it's really fun to be smarmy in YouTube videos, but the monetary element is kind of just a fact of life in the world we live in. Speaking of which, let's talk about the price argument. Heavily printing Soul Ring in Commander sets has undoubtedly kept the price of the card low, and the price of a card being low leads more players to play it in casual EDH. A fast mana card being $100 or $200 rather than $1 or $2 will absolutely result in fewer people playing that card. 85% of decks run Soul Ring, but only 11% of players run the very similar Mana Crypt, and every commander with a more than 50% play rate of Mana Crypt is almost exclusively used in CEDH. So, if my goal is less fast mana in casual EDH, and that is my general preference, not reprinting Soul Ring absolutely would have accomplished that goal to a large extent. Now, this is allowed to make you uncomfortable, and it makes me uncomfortable too. So let's just take a minute to sit in our discomfort with playing a card game that is also a network of commercialized products. The whole thing feels kind of weird, huh? Okay, getting back into the topic at hand, I would posit that the argument I just presented is more or less a mixture of my preferences and a set of readily available facts about the nature of humans, money, and markets. However, on a vibes level, I understand why this was a volcanically controversial take, and in retrospect, I probably wouldn't choose to make it again. A direct implication of what I'm saying here is that I think it's good when cards I dislike are more expensive to keep them in fewer people's reach. And there's something kind of harsh about that, right? There is an undeniable element of inherent classism to players with more money having access to more cards than less wealthy opponents. This is most obvious when you think about high-powered staples. As somebody who plays mostly budget decks, you can believe that I've experienced some fleeting pangs of frustration when my tuned budget piles have gotten blown out by opponents playing a series of powerful staples that I'm unable to keep up with. However, if I may be allowed this one indulgence, I want to give just a bit of pushback here. The classism argument is a lot weaker when it comes to EDH compared to basically every other constructed format in the game. CEDH is very proxy-friendly, and for the rest of the EDH format, the casual EDH format, there is no set power level to keep up with. Lacking access to a particular powerful card, while potentially being a subjective issue within the context of a playgroup or table, doesn't objectively make a deck more or less ideal in any sense. Now, this isn't to say power level is irrelevant. Players might have a specific power level they want to play at, and if they're struggling to boost a deck up to that point, a natural reaction might be to forlornly gaze upon the Rhystic Studies and the Rate Henges and the One Rings of the world and ask why they must be denied these things on account of their wallet. But the solution of all players living in a land of ubiquitous staples with 25% of a deck immediately gobbled up by these sorts of high-powered cards as soon as a player picks their colors, well, it's garbage. There is a profound uncreativity to the proliferation of so-called must-play staples within the Commander format, and when I hear players pine after this vision of the format, my more callous instincts want to interpret this as them saying, why can't I be allowed to be less creative? I certainly don't want to discount the feelings of players who are struggling to win games and not having fun because of it. Those people exist, and they matter. But in a casual social format, I can come up with several far better solutions to this problem than just printing enough copies of the One Ring that everybody and their uncle can have one for 50 cents. If you want to play at a higher power level, have a conversation about proxying. If you want to play at a lower power level, talk to your opponents about that. And if the people you find yourself playing against are too ornery and inconsiderate to spend even an ounce of effort helping you have fun in a casual card game format, they're not worth playing against. I suppose this video wouldn't be complete if I didn't return to the actual question of the problem with budget cards. Is there a problem with budget cards? Is it bad when a card's price in dollars or euros or yen doesn't reflect its power level? Well, I think this is a question with a lot of layers to it, and my feelings were complicated even a year ago. Despite the title thumbnail combo, the actual contents of the video were more of a free-form ramble on the subject of cards like this, rather than being some sort of pointed takedown. Sol Ring in particular serves as the most dramatic example of a power-cost imbalance, and the fact that one of the most powerful mana artifacts in the game is run in all sorts of decks in the range of janky and budget is a striking thing to observe. This out-of-placeness is what I was really trying to comment on. What does it mean when a Sol Ring sits in a deck alongside a bunch of janky commons? To some people, this situation constitutes a problem, but to others, the answer to this question is a dynamic game. Sol Ring can be a factor that adds variance through its power level and enables the common jank of the world to keep up with the sweaty, optimized piles of the oligarchs of the Magic the Gathering community, some might say. To put it in more mathematical terms, an injection of variance will always serve as an equalizing factor within games. This is true in terms of skill. A new player to Monopoly will have a better chance against average opponents than will a new player to chess, and we can see a parallel to this in the fact that it's equally likely for any player at a table to draw a Sol Ring. We can also think about how Sol Ring affects the average power level of a deck. If we construct a 10-point power scale and put Sol Ring at a 10 out of 10, a deck whose average power level is a 4 out of 10 will be more improved by a Sol Ring than a deck whose average power level is an 8 out of 10. Thus, you could argue that Sol Ring and cards that are similarly accessible and powerful serve as a moderating factor between different decks and power levels. I don't find this argument particularly compelling as a justification for Sol Ring itself, such as my distaste for fast mana, but the broader point is a reasonable one that speaks to the complexity of a casual card game format. In addition, there will always be cards that are powerful compared to their price. Cards see varying numbers of copies printed, and there are a myriad of other factors that can also serve to pump up or depress a given card's price. So, with all that in mind, the answer to the question, is there a problem with budget cards, is that no, there is absolutely no inherent problem with powerful cards being cheap. Rather, prices of cards have an influence on power level variance, and within the context of a social format like EDH, the cards being varying power levels poses certain challenges to players. Power level differences in cards are more easily detectable in simpler, more mundane cards than they are for flashy synergy picks, and players should be careful to make sure that they end up with the right balance of vegetables to other stuff. If your deck has a mixture of stronger and weaker cards, this will naturally increase its variance, and in some cases that added variance might make opponents wary. If they've seen your deck's pop-off scenario before, they might focus attention on you even when there's another deck at the table that's more powerful overall, but lower variance. These are all challenges posed by cards having variable power levels, and navigating them can help players to have more fun. The framing device of budget cards was one I chose to string together the specific sets of points I wanted to make a year ago, but the questions at the heart of the video run much deeper than money. Casual formats in any sort of game will always have an inherent tension between more competitive play and play that is more expressive and less goal oriented. These things exist on a hazy spectrum, and there's no one place on that spectrum that will maximize fun for all people involved in a given game or format. No single right answer to questions on how decks should or shouldn't be put together. At the end of the day, I'm just one guy giving you my best advice on how to navigate that complex world. Thanks for making it to the end. This is a bit different than most of what I make, so you can let me know what you think about it. I'm genuinely curious whether this retreading of a controversial topic works any better for people. If you want to support me in making videos like this, you can subscribe to my Patreon for $3 a month. I'm currently taking submissions for my August deck review, and I've also started releasing less scripted facecam videos, including one about Cascade about a week ago.